So you could say that the Syrian conflict that we're seeing today didn't even really start in Syria. It started back in Tunisia in December 2010, the birthplace of the so-called Arab Spring, when a fruit seller named Mohammed Bouazizi was frustrated by police abuse and poverty, set fire to himself, and died a month later. That single act of protest set off violent demonstrations that soon toppled Tunisia's dictator. Anger spread like wildfire throughout the Arab world. Soon, governments in Egypt, Bahrain, Libya, Yemen, they're facing mass demonstrations, toppling dictators and sparking civil wars. So in March 2011, the Arab Spring came to Syria, when dozens of peaceful Arab protesters were shot dead by President Bashar al-Assad's security forces, prompting nationwide unrest.
The face of revolution.
In July of that year, after months of Assad failing to appease citizens and continuing to slaughter his opposition, some protesters began to fight back, including a group of Syrian army defectors who were trained by Turkey and went on to form the Free Syrian Army, the first major rebel military group in the war. By January 2012, the Syrian Uprising became a civil war, and soon after, a group of Syrians in the north called the Kurds took up arms and claimed independence from Syria. So by 2012, Assad had lost control over a lot of the country, so he looked to Iran for help. Now, the next 4 years are defined by a few key things.
We know the Assad regime was responsible.
First, in 2013, Barack Obama condemned the Syrian regime for its use of chemical weapons against its opponents and began a CIA training and arms program for Syrian rebels, actively involving the U.S. in the war for the first time. But the war changed when ISIS formed, the Islamic State. Jihadis who had been trained and hardened by the war in Iraq next door stepped up their violence in Syria in 2013. Mostly by going after other anti-Assad rebel groups rather than going after the Assad regime itself. Once they had a large enough part of Syria and Iraq under their control, their leader declared a renewed Islamic caliphate. Fighting ISIS became a new priority for the U.S., who allied with the Kurds to do so. Now fast forward to September 2015, when Russia officially intervened on Assad's behalf, launching airstrikes throughout Syria. Now, that was the state of play when President Donald Trump, who was a longtime critic of President Obama's policy in Syria, came into office. On January 16, 2017, just 4 days before his swearing-in ceremony, Trump said in an interview that he opposed intervention against Assad. But that changed just 3 months later, when on April 4th, dozens of Syrian civilians were killed in a chemical attack, prompting Trump to order U.S. warships to launch 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles at the airbase from which the Syrian government had allegedly staged their own chemical attack. But it didn't stop Syria from using chemical weapons again. On April 14th, 2018, a year after those Tomahawk missiles, the United States, France, and the United Kingdom launched airstrikes on 3 sites in Syria after helicopters dropped barrel bombs filled with toxic gas on a rebel-held town in eastern Ghouta. Due to the years of destruction, millions of people fled the country, creating a humanitarian crisis in the Middle East and Europe. Meanwhile, the U.S. worked with the Kurds to push back ISIS and all but defeated them. On December 19th last year, President Trump tweeted, "We have defeated ISIS in Syria. My only reason for being there during the Trump presidency." He also ordered staff to execute the full and rapid withdrawal of U.S. military from the country. But that didn't sit well with his generals. The next day, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis resigned in protest, and soon after, Trump decided to leave nearly 1,000 troops in Syria. So where does Turkey fit into all of this? Well, this is where it gets really complicated. America's Kurdish allies who were fighting ISIS in northeastern Syria have called themselves the Syrian Democratic Forces. They're a multi-ethnic group, but they're mostly led by Kurdish fighters belonging to so-called People's Protection Units, or the YPG. The YPG is very closely connected to a Kurdish separatist group in Turkey known as the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK. The Turkish government considers both groups terrorists that they want to crush. In late 2018, President Erdogan announced that Turkey had postponed a military offensive in northeastern Syria to get rid of the SDF after talking to President Trump. That was the climate in northeastern Syria until October. That's when President Erdogan and President Trump had a phone call, and the White House released a statement saying that the U.S. was going to be withdrawing all of its troops from northeastern Syria. The next day, Turkey announced its launch of Operation Peace Spring, which Erdogan said was an attempt to eliminate threats from the Kurdish militia and the Islamic State. He added that it would also allow them to form a safe zone in the area to which they could return millions of Syrian refugees who had moved to Turkey. Now, Trump said he would totally destroy and obliterate Turkey's economy if the country did anything he considers, quote, off limits. And then he went on to say that the U.S. hadn't abandoned the Kurds, but that's how much of the international security community sees the move.
We're getting out of the endless wars. We have to do it. And eventually somebody was going to have to make the decision.
As American troops steadily continue to leave Syria, the United States imposed heavy sanctions on Turkey for their military advances.
With the implementation of the ceasefire, the United States will not impose any further sanctions.
That quickly changed after the two countries reached a ceasefire agreement, with Turkey saying it would suspend its operation for 5 days to allow Kurdish forces to retreat. The Syrian conflict is a fiasco, and it's one that Trump inherited. He didn't create it. But his moves now have a spotlight on them. Only time will tell whether leaving the region will create either more opportunities for peace or more opportunities for religious extremists and authoritarians to take control and expand their power.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here. And click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.